Hello, this is Dr. Jennifer Bashaw, and this is Christianity 125. We are on lecture 6 now. We have moved through the Torah or the Pentateuch, and we have also gone past the prophets, the former and latter prophets, and now we are starting this section of the writings. This particular lecture will cover poetry and wisdom literature. So if you remember, the Jewish Bible is the Tanakh, and the T, N, and K stand for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketubim. So we're starting the Ketubim, the writing section, and we'll look at poetry and wisdom literature first at Psalms, Song of Songs, and Lamentations, which have quite a bit of poetry in them, and then we'll look at wisdom literature, including Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. Psalms is a popular book in the Bible. It is the largest, and it is in the middle, right in the middle of the Bible. What's important to note about the Psalms is that these are expressions from the people of God to God. These are poems that were written, songs that were written by people in their best times and then their worst times, bringing their feelings to God. So when you pick up and read the Psalms, you should read them more like an expression of human emotion rather than a message from God, like the prophets were bringing messages from God. The Psalms is a message from the people to God. There are 150 chapters or psalms in the book of Psalms, and it's interesting. They are numbered, but many of the psalms also have little titles that we call superscriptions, secondary titles. Here's an example of one. Psalm 3 is also called, its superscription is a Psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. So this teaches us two different things about the Psalms. One, that they were written by people, real people, but they weren't all written by David. Some were written by other musicians, and sometimes these were composed at particular time periods in their history. And so some of these Psalms will tell you when they were written, so you can go back and look at the story of David in Samuel and see, here it would be in Kings, and see when was it that he wrote this. Here he was fleeing from his son Absalom, who had rebelled against him. This was in the difficult period of David's life. And here you have this psalm: O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Selah, that's a musical term. But you are a shield around me, O Lord. You bestow glory on me and lift up my head. To the Lord I cry aloud, and he answers me from his holy hill. Selah. So many of the Psalms are like this. You get a glimpse into the occasion of their writing, and it kind of deepens your experience of these poems and these songs. The book is organized into smaller chapters or books. So 5 books make up this larger book of Psalms, and so you can see here all the divisions of the 5 different books. Many people think that the 5 books are supposed to correspond to the 5 books of the Torah or the Pentateuch, and that's very likely. There are several different types of psalms, and these are the most common ones. Psalms of praise. We probably tend to think about those the most when we think of psalms. We sing hymns in church that maybe are based on the psalms, but actually the most frequent type of psalm is the psalm of lament. Psalm 13 is one example of that, and I'll read it briefly to you so you get an idea of what a psalm of lament sounds like. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me. So many of these Psalms of Lament express real painful feelings that these psalmists have, but oftentimes they end in hope because they are crying out to God and they know that God is there and will answer them or be strength for them. Royal Psalms are also another type of psalm which basically are psalms that talk about God as king, or actually talk about the king of Israel. And then Psalms of Zion are psalms about Jerusalem. So there are very many types of psalms throughout the book of Psalms, but it's an important part of Israel's history. These are the not just the poems that were written, but the songs that they sang as they came together and worshipped God all throughout Jewish history, and now in Christian history we also use these in our worship of God. Lamentations is the next book we're going to talk about, and it's a good transition from a psalm of lament to the actual book of Lamentations. The traditional author is the prophet Jeremiah, but usually it's attributed to him, but it probably was written by somebody else, maybe his scribe, and it expresses the feelings that people had around the time period of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 587. So the theme really is just sorrow over what has happened to sinful Judah, and sorrow for the sins of what Judah has done, not just them calling out and crying to God, but also a repentance. See, O Lord, how distressed I am. I am in torment within in my heart. When in my heart I am disturbed, for I have been most rebellious. Outside the sword bereaves, inside there is only death. And as you read through the Lamentations, it's depressing. This is a difficult time for Jerusalem. They were locked up in Jerusalem. Basically, supplies had been cut off. The Babylonians were trying to siege Jerusalem. They cut off all supplies, and the people inside were dying. They were starving. They were horrible things were happening. People were eating their own children to survive. So it was a bleak time in their history. But what we learned from these laments is that it is okay to bring our pain and our sorrow and our complaints even to God. We see this in the Psalms of Lament in the Psalms, and we also see it here in Lamentations, that we do not just need to bring praise and happiness to God, but we can also bring our torments and our sadness. Lamentations does have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore I will wait for him. That word here in Lamentations, great love, is the word chesed, which is the Hebrew word really meaning covenant love that God has for God's people, that loyal, faithful love that we saw in Hosea, that God would not abandon God's people no matter how unfaithful they were. Many times we translate this word loving kindness, but here at the end of Lamentations, even in the midst of suffering, the people know that God will rescue them. The people know that God loves them, and that covenant is not something that God will break. Song of Songs, or sometimes known as Song of Solomon, is another book of poetry here. Two Old Testament books are completely devoted to poetry and songs, and we looked at Psalms already. But the second one here is the Song of Songs. What's interesting is it's a much more secular theme than the Psalms are, because the topic is human love. The Song of Songs does not even mention God throughout its poetry. And really, most scholars, when they read it and look at it and compare it to the poetry of the other nations during this time, this is erotic love poetry, just like the other nations would have written. And so it's interesting to wonder, why is this book in the Bible? What this purpose does this book have in the history of Old Testament literature? But really, when you look at the theme, you can see why it is in the Bible. It is supposed to teach the readers to understand and to appreciate sexuality and love as a good gift from God. There are so many ways in human history that we have distorted love and sexuality and have forgotten that this is a good gift from God. So it celebrates love in the context of this fiance, these two fiancés that are about to be married, and it celebrates that. And so there's great value in these poems that are collected here. Even if God is not mentioned, it is an important part of human experience and our relationship with others. So moving into the section on wisdom literature, just a background about biblical wisdom. Biblical wisdom is something that we classify as general revelation. So general revelation is just the idea that God is the creator and people can know something about God from looking at creation, by observing the natural order. This is accessible to all people. And so general revelation is just looking around at the world and saying, oh, these are the things I can learn about God and people just by looking. It's contrast to special revelation, which is what we've looked at mostly here in the Old Testament. Special revelation is God's ongoing revelation to chosen individuals. So God came and spoke to Abraham, and God came and chose Moses. This is a special revelation. God can be known by people, by humans, which is part of special revelation, but this kind of revelation is not accessible to all people until it's written down and we can read about it. So general revelation is just looking at the world and saying, okay, these are the things we can learn about God by looking around. So the wisdom literature we're going to look at is Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, and we already looked at the Song of Songs. This can also be sometimes included in wisdom literature. The Proverbs is going to be our sort of bread and butter of wisdom literature. It's just a daily wisdom. These things are typically true in the world. Ecclesiastes offers us an alternative perspective, kind of a skeptical wisdom, looking around and saying, you know what, things don't always work out the way we want them to, or the way that Proverbs tells us that it works out. Job is also alternative or skeptical wisdom, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to Job. So Proverbs, the purpose of Proverbs is really just to help people understand how to do what is right and how to live a just life. The main theme is a verse that comes from the first chapter: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And fear here of the Lord, which comes up quite a bit in Proverbs, it's not like a fear like being scared, terror, afraid God will judge you or punish you. No, but fear here means respect. When you respect the Lord, great respect of the Lord means that you will live a life that is pleasing and honorable to God. Here are some of the short, pithy, wise sayings of Proverbs, and there's many, many throughout the books, the chapters of Proverbs. Lazy hands make a person poor, but diligent hands bring wealth. The Lord abhors dishonest scales, but accurate weights are his delight. You notice that a lot of these are contrasting statements. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. And whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid. This one's one of my favorite ones. It's very blunt. But when you look at these sayings, you get the idea that the author, which probably are different authors, Proverbs is often attributed to Solomon, wise Solomon, but probably these were Proverbs that were collected by Solomon and others, of just people trying to say, here are some things that we've noticed about life. When you're lazy, you tend to be poor. When you work hard, you tend to be wealthy. Now we know, even as we say that, this is not the case in all of life. There are many people who work very hard and they will never be wealthy. But this is just general statements to kind of inspire people to live good, wise, hardworking lives. So I have an assignment for you. If you go to the folder, and you'll find an interpretive assignment, and it'll be the Proverbs assignment. And this is kind of a fun, creative assignment I want you to do. There are five different Proverbs here, and they're really set in the context of ancient literature. And so I want you to update them a bit. So look at each of these and try to find a way to say them creatively with images from our own culture that might help people understand what it means. So that means that you have to look at these, kind of figure out what they're trying to say, and then translate it into modern language. So the first one, for example, do not let loyalty or faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So the binding around the neck and the tablet of your heart are both, ancient images. Something today might be, put them on your Google Calendar or write them on Post-it notes, something like that, that updates the idea, but makes it easier to communicate in our culture. So for each of these, you're going to do 5 different proverbs and update them. So this video is about to end, so go ahead and do this assignment, and we'll start the next lecture after this.